join us in welcoming Francisco-Fernando Granados and our keynote speaker, Dr. Sarah Thornton.
Dr. Thornton is a writer and sociologist of art. Her books include her latest, 33 Artists in 3 Acts from 2014, and the international bestseller, 7 Days in the Art World from 2008, which has been translated into 17 languages and was named one of the best art books of the year by the New York Times. She is the co-editor of the Subcultures Reader and has published her work as chief correspondent of contemporary art for The Economist, as well as in many publications, including Art Forum, The Guardian, and The New Yorker. Dr. Thornton left Canada for Britain on a prestigious Commonwealth scholarship. In Britain, she received a BA in Art History and a PhD in
BA in Art History from Concordia.
From Concordia, there you go. BA in Art History, pardon me, from Concordia, Montreal.
From Britain.
And a PhD in Sociology in Britain. And she ran the MA in Media Studies at Sussex University. Her early research set out to investigate hierarchies of coolness through a study of dance club and rave cultures. She later spent a year doing underground ethnographic research as a brand planner in an international advertising agency before turning her attention back to art, which she calls her first love. Dr. Thornton's writing on art presents its structures as stages where carefully crafted characters negotiate their position, somewhere between the privilege of mobility and self-making and the vulnerability of kinship and self-exposure. With the goal of humanizing and demystifying contemporary art, Dr. Thornton writes rhythmic and entertaining narratives underpinned by detailed observation and multidisciplinary research. These narratives provide insight into large-scale events where art finds itself woven together with mass media, as well as more intimate moments of reflection, which direct her subjects to a simple but extremely complex question, which I think is important for many of us here. What is an artist? The scenes in 33 Artists in 3 Acts are structured around the political, relational, and technical dimensions of the artist's existence. As figures weave in and out and back into the narrative, the multiplicity of perspectives contours what artist Andrea Fraser, speaking to Dr. Thornton, proposes as an instance of the possible, or instances of the possible, rather. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Thornton. First of all, how do you gain access to such a wide variety of not just, any kind of people in the field, but really, people who have a lot of power, power players. How do you, as a sort of counterpoint to that, how do you find perhaps the artists in the book that, are less well known?
Well, I am, research is really the driving force for me. It's the thing I love doing most. I am, like when I have a question that I want answered, I feel very driven. And that's, fuels my desire for access. I think access is something you learn while, something I learned reading about ethnography and training myself up in ethnographic method. Ethnography combines participant observation and interviewing, and I'm of the opinion that any art history student interested in contemporary art should be schooled up in ethnography because it's a means of accessing the present. When I studied art history, we only discussed historical archival methods, and of course, if you're studying contemporary art with living artists and you're doing a studio visit, then it would help to have more fine-tuned interviewing skills and things like that. So when I go into an artist's studio or a dealer's back room, I will have a tape recorder, a notebook, and a camera. And I will be documenting the experience and the environment and my character with all 3. So the tape recorder will be running. I'll take photographs of absolutely every corner and every, like from, toe to head. Photographs, trying to do it. I do it with permission and as quickly as I possibly can, so as not to make them feel too self-conscious. And then I'll write notes as well about nonverbal behavior, things that I find doubtful at the time, the next question I want to ask. I'm amazed at the number of my art historian friends who go into an art studio with just a notebook. I don't know how they can actually do a decent interview that way, because you're so busy writing down what they're saying that you don't have time to really think around what they're saying. And notice the script they're telling you that they've told 100 people before. To really get a grip on the nuance of their responses, you cannot be writing down what they're saying. Your notes have to be a meta-discourse upon it all. Basically, for those of you who haven't read the book, it's not a series of profiles. It is, I very much try to create a situation where I can compare and contrast artists. And so each act has a couple of antagonists or foils for one another. In Act 1, it's Ai Weiwei and Jeff Koons. In Act 3, it's Damien Hirst and Andrea Fraser, who I call the anti-Hirst. And she's the hero, and as you have seen, my pinup. And then in the middle section of the book, which is called Kinship, we have Carol Dunham and Laurie Simmons, a husband and wife artist couple, along with the notorious skirt chaser Mauricio Catalan and the true loner Cindy Sherman. So those are all recurring characters who have repeated scenes that are played off each other in different ways. And then there are solo scenes that are interjected. And for me, the climax of Act 1 is very much Martha Rosler, who is so straight talking and has such a clear perspective on politics that she kind of, clears the air and takes perhaps the most strident stance in a way that casts revealing light on Ai Weiwei and Koons and the other artists in that part of the book.
Well, picking up on that, how do you understand the way you craft your writing in relationship to the sort of broader landscape of writing about art?
Well, let's see. I mean, rightly or wrongly, I feel fairly alone in the way I go about my work. On the outside, I guess it looks like, the New Yorker writes artist profiles, and there are newspaper journalists who write in an accessible fashion in what might at first appear to be a similar way to me. But my research process is so different, and I wasn't trained as a journalist, and once an ethnographer, always an ethnographer. I do look at it a different kind of way, and I actually over-research to a degree which is no journalist would probably do because it's so cost effective. I also see 33 Artists in 3 Acts as kind of an institutional critique in a certain kind of way of the extent to which artists are individuated and isolated and dealt with in monographs or discrete profiles and not compared and contrasted. When I first started talking about my idea for the book with some very close curator friends, they were really working with water on the idea. Well, the first, they didn't like the question, what is an artist? And for me, that question came out of 7 Days in the Art World, chapter 2, the crit class, where I started asking the question, what is an artist? And as an ethnographer, if the question is met with hostility, that's a good sign, right? That means it's a really good question. If everyone has pat answers and they want to discuss it for, then you're really within the bounds and conventions of your social world. If you find a question that people want to squash, you're onto something good. And also the book is divided into 3 themes: politics, kinship, and craft. And those themes were chosen after I'd done interviews with 100 artists, and those were the themes that rose to the surface in terms of this question, what is an artist? So are you an artist, or are you a didactic illustrator, an activist? You know, are you an artist, or are you just a craftsperson, a designer, a glorified designer? Are you an artist, or are you like a wife, mother, and hobbyist? You know, these seem to be the frontiers at which the real artist seemed to become someone else, something a little less than a real artist. And so although, in this post-structuralist thinking world that we live in, it's hard to find an artist who believes in authenticity, at the end of a 3-hour interview, it'll almost invariably crop up something like, oh, well, he's not a real artist. That is still pretty ingrained. It's very hard to become an artist. Artists find it difficult to declare themselves artists. That's one of the questions I always ask, is like, at what point do you feel confident declaring yourself an artist? Getting an MFA is usually not enough. It's a job. It's not a job, it's a whole identity. And so it's, the question is rich in multiple answers, and the artists, people say, well, what's your answer? If there was a single answer, I would write a whole book about it. The sheer multitude of distinct and interesting answers, and the fact that these different characters are in here is testament to the fact that it's such a highly customizable role. Well, the work has to convince, and the work is still the most important thing at the beginning and end of the day. But works are rarely seen on their own in isolation. They don't walk into museums by themselves. They don't get a dealer. And so I think that there's no recipe for credibility at all. Credibility comes from intense self-belief on the part of the artist, and a belief that's not delusional and that can command the respect of others. At the end of the day, an artist needs to command the belief of others. Contemporary art is a belief system. It's easy for us who believe in contemporary art to remember that it's actually a belief system, and most of the world doesn't believe in contemporary art. Most of the world does not think that Marcel Duchamp's urinal is an artwork. They think it is taking the piss. And in writing for The Economist, I understand that. Because The Economist is a very highly educated readership, but it's not necessarily up on contemporary art. And for a lot of readers, Picasso is an artist, and Duchamp is a prankster. Yeah. So, and Duchamp played with credibility. It's a key theme in his work. And the fountain is very much an artwork, and all the ready-mades really are art, but fountain in particular, because it's a urinal, put belief on the table. It's a challenge, right? Put a urinal on the table, sign it art, call it fountain. You're going to believe this is an artwork because I say it is? Well, it took 50 years maybe for people to get there, but actually now it is.
He won out.
He won. And, but it very, this is the case for every artist, every contemporary artist nowadays, right? There's no standard of excellence or like benchmark of quality that means you're a real artist, Actually, if you're too dexterous with a fine brush and you can paint in a hyper-realist style, that might be a detriment to your credibility in today's landscape. So, what is it that you're bringing to the table? You're bringing your own standards of excellence, your own criteria for what a good artwork looks like. And you have to convince others in those standards.
Well, and I think that the nicely generative thing about that proposition is that the artist can be seen as an agent for the work, not just in the sort of purely commercial sense, but perhaps in the more sort of deconstructive political sense, you know, giving the work agency.
Absolutely, and I think that all too often, especially when conversations revert to the art market, artists are presented as innocent victims. And you know, the sooner that is taken away, the better. You need to see yourself as an agent. You need to figure it out, because otherwise you will be an embittered victim. You know, my form of sociology of culture is very much informed by British cultural studies and also by Chicago school sociologists like Howard Becker, and then also by Bourdieu. But Andrea is the artist who I mean, our politics are a little bit different. I'm a bit more of a liberal, but really, I see eye to eye with her in many, many, many different respects. And her practice is, I mean, it's funny, when I told her about the concept for this book, she said, oh yeah, it's just like official welcome. Official welcome being a performance, the performance she performs in the book, in her first scene in Act 3, a performance that she has done about 15 times over the past 15 years, where she incarnates different artist roles and different supporters roles. And it's true, there's an affinity in that structure between her comparing and contrasting different styles of being an artist and different styles of the performativity of being an artist. And the book is, I mean, we were both born in the same year, so we're exactly the same age.
Right.
We're both Bourdieu scholars. She's read a lot of Pierre Bourdieu, written about Bourdieu, used it strategically in a very different way to me, you know, kind of used it to, as ammunition to critique her own institution. I think I'm just, you know, thinking of Bourdieu way in a lot of respects. So Andrea is my ideal artist within this book. She says a lot of things that I need someone to say.
Right.
That's why I save her till last. She has the last word. I've always been a little hesitant to identify trends, partly because I think I'm very aware of the means by which we see things, you know. And sometimes a trend is not, it was always there, it's just all of a sudden it seems strategic to look at it. I mean, because of my themes, politics, kinship, and craft, and I'm fairly content-driven when it comes to art, partly because it gives me more to write about. I actually love I'm fairly seduced visually by beautiful things and formally interesting things, but they don't leave me as a sociologist of art with much to say. So I actually don't know how to answer your question at all. I just know that there aren't many formalist abstract artists in the book. Beatriz Mahales, perhaps, is the closest to that. And I love her work, and I like describing being in the studio with her, describing how she goes about her process and how she sees her work and how she sees her work in relationship to a Duchampian tradition and all that kind of thing. I would be perhaps one of the least able people in the room to write a review of Beatriz Mahales in a straightforward sense, looking at the work itself. So I don't know if there has been a return to the world or not, because my own lenses are so, my sociological lens is going to lead me to stuff that is about the world. I mean, the theatrical metaphor comes from Irving Goffman, who wrote a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And he's a Chicago school sociologist who analyzed social situations as if they were theater. And, this book is sometimes described as being about persona, which is not the case at all. It's actually just about public lives and how we choose to present ourselves publicly, which always involves a little bit of censoring and enhancing. We're not in our underwear here. Metaphor is one that comes out of the deep roots of ethnographic sociology. I think that artists are probably on a stage even more than other kinds of worker, let's say, because it is an identity rather than just a job, and the work is integrally related to that public person. The more I went to the studios of artists with high levels of recognition, the more I felt like I was walking onto a stage set. And you can really see the difference between, just graduate, an artist who hasn't had a lot of studio visits, and the one who's been entertaining critics, curators, collectors, and dealers for 20 years. It's an extreme difference in terms of the self-consciousness of what's on display. And the book is very much about the performativity of being an artist. The choosing to be a recluse and leaving New York and living on a farm in Nebraska, is all part of it. That creates a narrative. I talk about acts and scenes. It was a means of, it informed the form of the book. Francisco brought up arts writing and in a conversation on the phone last week, I guess, talked about the genres and initially described arts writing as a genre, and I think it's multiple genres. So, the review is a genre, the profile is a genre, creative nonfiction is a genre. I see 7 Days in the Art World and 30 Fairs and 3 Acts as instances of creative nonfiction. And so I want to work with the forms in ways that reflect the content and cater to the content and bring my research to the fore in a way that is more compelling and persuasive and readable than it might otherwise be.
And I think since we had that conversation, I've been rethinking about that question of genre. Perhaps it's more like a kind of heuristic device, or like art is a way to sort of think through and look through different ways of writing. Maybe that's what art writing might be. Yes?
Well, I'm not sure actually, but because a review, you can say the review as a genre, there are similarities between reviewing a baseball match and reviewing an art show, which are independent. And there are similarities in profiling an artist and profiling a politician. So, and there are similarities in creative nonfiction despite the subject matter. So I don't know if I believe in, arts writing for me is, art criticism seems to be a very identifiable thing, but arts writing is not so identifiable for me. But then again, often when you're on the inside, you just see this proliferation of difference internally.
A matter of perspective.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I think we've run out of time. Thank you so very much.